let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome to Stargate to Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. And our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a mad painter. And this is Revolution Radio's Studio B. And our guest tonight is Bruce Cornet. And I'm trying to find his bio, but I don't see it showing up here. Anyway, Bruce has been with us a number of times. He's a researcher and an author. We're going to be talking about, looks like my page got screwed up. I'll have to go fix it. But we're going to be talking about reincarnation. And Bruce has uncovered that he is, I'm not going to reveal this right now. I'll let him do this. But he has a very famous previous life, and then he is going to tell us about his research and how he got some more evidence that this is truly who he is. So a lot of people are doing that. They might do regression or have a spontaneous memory, but then they research and they find more and more details, and it correlates. And I don't know what happened to my page I set up. It's not there, so I'll be fixing the page. I'm sorry, anybody wants to go on to aquarianradio.com. I put information up about the show, and somehow it's all screwed up. It didn't work. Alrighty. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say?
I'm very much interested. Why don't you put that microphone up here, too?
This is the microphone right there.
Oh, okay, yeah. I studied with Roger Wilger, and I've done a lot of regressing a lot of people, too. From the get-go, Stevenson got all these kids in India who said they were born some other place in some other time, and they said exactly what it would be like, and they went back, and there it was. And we have all these accounts of people that studied with great masters or were great masters in the past, and the evidence just keeps mounting up and mounting up that past lives and information from lives past is part of our consciousness. It's just there. It's in everybody. So I'm excited about today's show.
So welcome, Dr. Bruce Cornet, to our show. And
thank you, Sasha.
What do you want to tell our listeners about who you are before we start?
Well, okay. I started out in the sciences. In fact, I was very much interested in becoming a paleontologist when I was a child. I'd read several books on vertebrate paleontology, and I wanted to be a bone digger. And when I got into college, my advisors convinced me to take on a path of for pre-med, to become a medical student, largely because of my uncle, Henry L. Burge, who was an MD and ophthalmologist, a very famous one. he had performed one of the first corneal transplants in history, and he was very well known. And so he had a big influence on my life, and so that's why I started out at Fairleigh Dickinson University in New Jersey as in pre-med. But then I realized that my true interest was in geology, and I wanted to become a paleontologist. So I ended up transferring to the University of Connecticut, which has a very big department in geology. They also have a department in paleobotany, or did when I applied. And before I had started at the University of Connecticut, I signed up with a field group out of the University of Michigan, headed by Dr. Hibbard. I found this out by going to a meeting, a vertebrate paleontology meeting at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and somebody said, well, if you want to get some experience digging up bones, let me put you in contact with Dr. Hibbard. And he immediately grabbed on me and said, yes, we would like to have you in our field crew. And I spent the summer of 1968 out in Nebraska, northern Nebraska, living in a rented house with a whole crew of other people, that we would go out to this field, the stream, and dig up at certain localities of the sediments, the sands, and pass them through screens to catch the bones that were trapped in the sands. Then we'd dump these bones out onto white cloths, and they pick the bones out. And this was really exciting because Dr. Hibbard was an expert in fossil rodents. So, but he also, and the other members of the crew, went to one area in northwestern Nebraska. It was Oligocene in age, which means it's about 40 to 50 million years old, and it was filled with bones of various mammals that were rotting out of the clay sediments there, and I was hooked on it. And so in 1968, I asked the head of the vertebrate paleontology section at Yale University if they would support me or pay for my expenses if I went and collected fossils for the Yale Museum of Natural History. And they said, yes, we will definitely pay your expenses. So I got a friend out of the University of Connecticut who was interested in joining me, and we drove out on my Volkswagen bus, and we brought back so many fossils, and many in casts, plaster casts, that when I weighed in at a truck stop, I had close to a couple tons of specimens in the car, and by the time I got back to University of Connecticut, all the bearings in my wheels were shot. But the Yale University was extremely interested in what I found. I found the first complete skeleton of the Phaeocyanon, and a dog-like mammal, and it was starting to erode out of the clay sediments, and we got 99% of it. And they prepared it out and put it on exhibit at Yale Museum there for a number of years in their mammal hall. And I was very honored that they were that interested in what I was doing. But they were also...
How big was your dog? How big was your dog that you found?
It was about the size of a medium-sized modern dog. It was not. It was not a large dog and not a toy dog. It was just medium-sized, and it had the canine-like teeth, just like a dog, but its back of its skull was the size of a walnut. It had hardly any brain at all, and that was typical of most mammals back then, 40 to 50 million years ago, and all the way through the tertiary, from the end of the age of the dinosaurs to today, the brain size of all mammals has been increasing progressively. In other words, in order to outsmart your enemy, you've got to have a better intelligence. So it was a constant upgrade of intelligence, of predator, then prey, and then predator, and then prey. So we had this progression that you see through the fossil record. But I was then scheduled to apply to Yale University and to have and be a paleontology student. And Dr. Simons, who was an anthropologist, wanted me to be his student and work on early, ancestors of humans. And I was very much excited about this. And right at the very time that they were going to decide whether or not to have me as their student at Yale University, Dr. Simon, he quit and went to work for Duke University because he was in a very nasty divorce, and he had to get away from Connecticut. And I was left stranded. I had no advocate on the committee to ask that I be a student there the next year. So I went to my advisor at University of Connecticut, who just happened to be a paleobotanist, a very famous paleobotanist. And I had taken some of his courses in botany and paleobotany. And he said, well, why don't you get a master's degree in paleobotany under me, and that'll give you a couple of years to decide where to go, and maybe you can get back into Yale then. And I did. So I spent a couple of years working on Devonian plants, and then I was also out in the field in Connecticut collecting fossil samples for spores and pollen, which I had been shown can be used to age date stuff. And I discovered a locality in the Hartford Basin of Triassic-Jurassic age, which was at the time thought to be only Triassic in age. And the pollen samples that I extracted and looked at with the help of a palynologist, he said, this is not Triassic, this is Jurassic. This is bringing back into the argument as to whether or not there is any Jurassic age rocks on the East Coast. Well, a palynologist and botanist at Penn State heard about me through my advisor at a conference, and he offered me a position at Penn State to do a PhD on the palynology of all of the Newark basins up and down the East Coast. I accepted, and my wife and I moved out to State College, Pennsylvania, and I spent 5 years there completing my degree, sampling thousands and thousands of rocks up and down the East Coast, and processing hundreds and hundreds of samples, and looking at millions of pollen grains, and produced a 500-page thesis that for the first time age-dated all of the basins up and down the East Coast, and showed that the upper third of the stratigraphic sections in those basins were Jurassic, and the USGS had to redo all of their maps of the East Coast because I had changed the age dates of everything on the East Coast. So that's how I got into the oil industry. They hired me down in Houston, and I spent about 7 years down there, more than that. And then finally, when the oil industry collapsed, I got a job at Columbia University at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in Palisades, New York, and went to work with Dr. Paul Olson and Dr. Kent. So we drilled a bunch of wells in the Newark Basin, and I was the well site geologist, and I had to describe all 28,000 feet of core we pulled out of 7 core holes between 1990 and 1993.
Wow.
So I got a lot of education about ancient climates because those core holes were dating the lake cycles in the Newark Basin, showing that they were forced by orbital influence of all the different planets on the climate of Earth, and that they're the same climatic cycles that we have today that caused the ice ages, etc. And so I got a lot of education in that. My work and papers are on ResearchGate, and they get a lot of interest and attention. But from the very beginning, all of that was with working on the Newark supergroup basins, especially on the pollen and spores of the Richmond Basin in Richmond, Virginia. I published many papers on the discovery of angiosperm pollen in those rocks, and most of the paleobotanists and palynologists of that time couldn't believe that I was recovering pollen of modern day angiosperms from those rocks, and they thought they were all contaminants, but I proved that they weren't. And so there was a big controversy, and I even had one of the people in the Cretaceous origin group say, well, you know, if you can't find something, you just ask Cornet to go out and look for it, and he's going to find it. So that is where I was before I ever got involved with UFOs or ETs or any of that.
Can we just stop for a minute and just what is the interest, or why would the academics want to deny the Jurassic level there? What's behind that?
Well, nobody had the fossil evidence. They had been trying to find pollen and spores in the Newark basins. A lot of people had collected samples and processed them and come up with nothing. I went out there and
I see.
And I started finding one sample after another that produced pollen and spores. Don't ask me why they were unsuccessful and I wasn't. I was successful. But it produced the basis of my research, and I benefited from it, obviously.
What was the tip off? What made you know where to look? How did you douse that level?
It was intuitive more than anything else. The right color and the right texture of the shales I was looking for, specific kind of shales that were deposited in lakes, lake environments below oxygen level, where the spores and pollen and organic material would be preserved in the sediments. And sure enough, the sediments that I was collecting, the rocks, were producing lots and lots of organic material, and I was able to extract the spores and pollen from those by various chemical techniques. And so, I mean, it was really amazing that I worked up all the way through the Triassic, from the Carnian, which is about 230 million years old, 20 million years old, all the way up into the early Jurassic, which was about 190 million years old. So for over a spread of at least 30 million years, I collected samples and was able to fit them into the chronology that was created over in Europe in type sections that were ammonite dated, and so that I could tell exactly what age my samples were based on the spores and pollen that those samples contained, because they compared with the spores and pollen from rocks of the same age in Europe, and were they able to piece this together. And it was a lot of fun, an enormous challenge. But as you can tell, I went from interested in doing vertebrates, collecting vertebrates, and to collecting plants, and then collecting pollen. So my career took a very different course from what I started out with. And then after all of those core holes were drilled and the samples described in 1993, my life took a very different turn. And I ended up leaving Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, and I had met a woman who was willing to fund my research into the Wallkill River Valley of New York and Pine Bush UFOs. And that happened. that really did. And I spent the next 10, 11 years working on describing what was happening in the skies over New York, because I was having a lot of success in being able to photograph unconventional, extraordinary craft flying around.
So what did you do with the information? I know you wrote a book, but so you photographed a lot of this and you filmed it, right? So
right.
Did you make a movie or video or anything from it?
Well, I'm on quite a few television shows through the 90s into the early 2000s, showing images and videos of the stuff that I collected during that period. I've documented over 137 close encounters with the ships that were actually putting on performances for people on the ground. It was extraordinary. I mean, as a scientist, I have a very high level of curiosity. And one of the things that I realized when I was working with Olson and Kent at Lamont Doherty is that they were at the top of the food chain. In other words, they were in control of the money. They were in control of their lives. They were at teaching positions, et cetera, good research positions with money. And I was just their technician, the person that was doing the collecting and processing the samples, and I didn't have any security whatsoever in my future, and no opening to be able to improve and get a permanent position at Columbia University. So when my wife said that I will fund you and do this, because she was a computer software programmer and worked with major companies and earning a lot of money, and she said, if you help raise my kids, I'll fund your research, basically. So that's how that turned out. And I'm very grateful to what she did for me during those 11 years.
What was it like with you and the kids?
Oh, we got along. I mean, I disciplined them and watched over them and ran the household just like a mother would, in a sense. I felt a little bit strange doing that, but I also got a great appreciation for women who raise kids, and where their husband is bringing in the money. So
you did a role reversal, but so it didn't add to your resume for a career. So this is this wife passed or something. This is one of the ones that passed, or did you just get a divorce?
Right. Well, yeah, this is a past marriage that ended when all her kids left the nest, and she was getting jobs in other states and living in other states, and I was there living alone with 7 cats in her house. And she finally said, that job offer that you got out at National Institute for Discovery Science in Las Vegas, take it. I'll do everything to help you get out there. She did. And basically that was when we became separated and our lives went in different directions.
Wow. So it was an amicable divorce. So,
yes.
So you have all this UFO, you're a researcher, you're an investigator, you're really detail-oriented, so you're able to do basically any topic you set your mind to.
Right.
So you went from that type of research. Where did you go next? What did you do next professionally? And then we'll go into...
I can't... About 8 years while you were raising the kids, I bet you were still doing stuff.
Well, I'm just saying, you were doing a lot, but it didn't end. You didn't end up being a Hollywood producer or writing a bunch of books. You did the research, and you did one book, right? I don't know.
Right. I did other many articles, because as a scientist working at Lamont Doherty and at the universities, I was expected to write technical papers, scientific papers, and to publish them in accredited journals. And that's what I did. My last scientific paper by myself was published in 2006. Actually, it was with Wanders, with another paleontologist. But Olson and Kent have continued to publish at Lamont Doherty, and they've included me as co-authors on at least 5 different papers since then. So the latest one, I think, was published in like 2017 or 2018. So I'm still, in the mix, so to speak, by knowledge and experience and in palynology, especially for the Triassic and Jurassic periods, is very still fresh, and I can continue to work in there, but I had no microscope. Remember, I only had a microscope for a short period of time when I was working at home in Red Bank, New Jersey, with my marriage. And then that microscope went back to Olson and Kent at Lamont Doherty. So I lost my eyes, so I couldn't work anymore and produce any new information on spores and pollen. And I didn't have a processing laboratory either that I could use. So my interest went full throttle in the direction of work that I could do out in the field of observation and surface geology and photography.
Wow.
Okay, so you got into...
That's sweet. When I was at UCLA, my chairman, Clement Meehan, used to fly over California in an airplane, and he could, just like you did with the soil, he would see where the grass was greener, and he said, "There's a burial there. Let's go down and look at it."
Mm-hmm.
Color. You were responding to color, and so was Clement.
Yes, and one of the things I discovered in the early 90s, and I was linked up with Pat in 1991, in late 91, I was first introduced to her. And she made me the offer to help raise her kids, and she would support my research. And then I moved into her house in Red Bank, New Jersey, and everything went well, in those early years. I would be able to drive all the way up to back to Middletown, New York, where I had previously lived, and I would do my field work. Well, one of the things that happened in 1994 is I was introduced to Richard Hoagland, and I'm not sure if you are aware of his work, but he's
sure I am.
Yeah, and I was on his team, his moon team, for about over a year, and I was also educated by him with all the lunar anomalies that he had found at that time, and also the Martian anomalies, and his work on the Cydonia complex on Mars and the face on Mars. And I was fascinated by that. I had never realized that there was so much evidence for artificial structures on Mars and the Moon, and they became well aware of how much the government was covering this stuff up. And I wanted to know more.
Tower on the Moon. Are they? I saw one of Hoagland's. It was a VHS. So this is a long,
towers, yeah.
And there were towers that were like 7 miles high.
Yes.
Were you where the towers?
Yes. That's what Hoagland was pushing in his talks that he had videotaped and was putting on the market, and at that time. And it's also, not only were there towers, but there were these huge transparent domes that covered a whole Mary that were as large as the state of Texas. And he said that because of the low gravity on Mars, glass on Mars is as hard as steel. And so you could have these very tall structures, And because there's no atmosphere, there's no wind to damage them, to erode them, to knock them down. The only problem you had is with micrometeors that would strike them over long periods of time and gradually frost the glass on their surfaces. One of the things I became aware of with working with Hoagland is that much of the surface of the moon that we see when you look up at the moon at night is glass. Is glass of one type or another, and that there had been these huge transparent domes all over the surface that were on top of a very deep alien base underneath the ground, and that there had been a war, and that many of these domes had been destroyed, and that's where you get some of the towers and the shards sticking up from the surface that were remnants of these domes. But there is a dome over Mare Crisium that is the right eye of the face on the moon, and it is almost completely intact. And the reason that the Russians were not able to land their Luna lander on that Mare is that they crashed into the dome, and they lost their robotic probe right at the same time that our astronauts were landing in Tranquility Base, in an area where another dome had been completely smashed. So there are aliens definitely living in the moon right now, on underground bases. No question about that.
The tower. Did he ever determine why they had these 7-foot tall towers?
Yes, they were service towers. Many of them were service towers for repairing and servicing the huge transparent domes that covered the regions. That's one aspect.
One of the Mike Barr was explaining how one of the astronauts who became a painter after he'd been mind wiped, and he was just he's just painting moonscapes with a dull, boring, and then he started painting with colors all over it, and then he started remembering, oh my gosh, when the sun hit all those domes, it made the whole splashes of colors all over, separated them spectrographically, and there was colors all over.
Yes.
And that corroborates what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of question right now, controversy over where did the moon come from? And is it artificial? How much of it is it artificial? And when did it get put in orbit? How is it as old as geologists and astronomers say it is?
Can you come closer to the mic a little bit or something? You sound like you're fading.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, it sounded like you were moving away from the mic.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about how much of the moon. Joseph Farrell took up the same questions, and so did Richard. It was placed there. That seems to be the conclusion. It could not have been happening by the normal foundation, the way satellites are formed. It was placed there.
Exactly. And but the biggest discovery I made in my early period of time with Richard Hoagland was finding the original Cydonia complex here on Earth that was in the Wallkill River Valley. Now, I have to look back and say, how the heck did I get directed into that very area where I was supposed to find this? And that I had the right background, the right interests, and the right skills to be able to do the geology in the Wallkill River Valley underneath all of these aerial displays and performances by exotic craft. How could I have found the face on Earth, which is the original face that was then copied on Mars? When the people who had built it during the last interglacial over 110,000 years ago realized that the ice age would bring glaciers down the valley that would topple the giant pyramids in the valley and erode the structures, the monuments that were now you could see them on Mars in the Cydonia complex. Most of those features on Mars had the originals here on Earth, including.
I wonder if you saw the originals in a past life. Do you think you might have actually witnessed them in a past life?
It's altogether possible. That may be why I was drawn to that area. I'll tell you a little bit about how I started to discover this. I saw a
picture of this face on Earth. Where can I find the pictures of the? You said it's the same as Cydonia.
Yes.
On Mars.
Right.
And where do you have a picture of that?
Valley, yeah.
Yes, I have a whole website that is called the Cydonia 2 Report that you can go to on the BUFOD website in the UK, and I think I've given you the URL to that. I can try to give it to you over the air for those who are interested in seeing this extraordinary stuff. Let me see. I'm going to go to the original.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat on Skype. We can get the link.
Yep, here it is.
You're saying there's
okay.
A face on Earth that's the same as the Cydonia face.
Right. It's actually the mirror image of the one on Mars. Mirror image. And it's the same size, and it looks as though it has been touched up and recarved since the end of the last ice age. It was significantly damaged by the glaciers that shaved off the face, and then somebody had to build a replica or restore the face by digging into the platform on which the face was built. On Mars, you have the face built on top of a platform, and that was high enough, thick enough that you can, if the face were scraped off, you could reshape the face in the underlying platform. So let me see, where is chat here? Okay, I'm linked up with you. Did you get my message, Janet, on your Skype?
I'm on the little phone here right now, but anyway.
I just gave you the URL.
I don't want to click this because it'll screw up I can't click it while we're talking. It'll screw up my conversation, but
during the break, yeah.
I'll look at it during the break, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
at any rate, it is a full report that I actually was told by somebody in NASA to take it down in 1999, and I did. And then December 31st, 2017, I decided, no, now everybody's talking about it on Ancient Aliens and the face on Mars. I'm going to reactivate it, which I did. So it's now available and has all of the details on how I found it. I watched a video of Richard Hoagland giving a talk at the United Nations back in 1994 on the crop circles in England, and how the Avery Circle and Silbury Hill resembled the crater and Tholis on Mars, and he thought that these were a 1/6 version of the originals on Mars, and he said that there was this connection or association between these features in England and all the crop circles and UFO sightings. So I knew about all of the UFO sightings in Pine Bush, and I said, well, I wonder if that there's something similar here that is attracting all of these craft. So I started a geological study. I got out topographic sheets, and I started looking all over the area in the valley and over a 200 square mile area, and lo and behold, I'd find this crater. And it's just southeast of Pine Bush. And I mapped it out. And it's been heavily eroded, but enough of the stream distribution reveals its presence. And since my work in geology and the oil business was to determine rock structure underground based on the surface expression and the way streams behave, I was able to see a crater there, and I called Richard Hoagland, and I said, Richard, how wide is the crater on Mars? And he said, 2.3 miles. And I had already measured the one on my map, and it was 2.3 miles. Then I asked him, what is the latitude of the center of the crater on Mars? And he said, well, I don't have that information. You're going to have to contact my other geologist. I did, and he sent me a map, and I determined that the crater on Mars, the center of it, is at 41 degrees 36 minutes latitude. So I went to my map on Earth, and I looked at the center of the crater I had mapped, and guess what its latitude was? 41 degrees 36 minutes. Oh my God. At that particular point, I was just shaking. I said, well, this is too much for coincidence, but I want more. I said, because he had identified the Avebury Circle and Silbury Hill in England as representing the crater and Tholus on Mars, I said, well, let me go look for the Tholus on Earth. So I was able to get a compass direction, relative direction for the Tholus from the crater, and I looked at my topographic sheets, I ran out my measurements, and when I came to the end of my measurement, I looked down, and there the Tholus was on Earth. It was beautifully preserved. And it's right at the center of the Stewart Army and Air Force Base, an international airport. The whole base surrounds it. The airstrips are tangents to the Tholus's round breast-like mound that sticks up. It's the same, every feature on it. Then I took with the computer analysis, I took the images from Mars, and I overlaid them on the images on Earth. And guess what? They match perfectly. And even the face on Mars, I flipped it over and because it was a reverse image, mirror image on Earth, and it fit perfectly. And I said, oh my God, this is too much. And then I said, well, let's go for the brass ring on this one. I said, how about the D&M pyramid? I know that the glaciers would have knocked it down. And there was a lot of debris scattered down the valley in the direction that the glaciers moved. And I said, well, let me go over and I got the topographic maps. I determined the size of the base of the D&M pyramid on Mars, and I was looking for anything on Earth that would fit. And there, in the exact place where it should have been, there were no mountains, and the mountains formed these angles that were 5-sided around the base of the D&M where it was near Warwick, New York. Right there, you can go and you can stand on the base of the D&M pyramid that was originally there, that rose thousands of feet into the air at one time. And so then I said, well, all right, if that's here, then let's go for the city of pyramids. So I looked around in the right direction, and lo and behold, I found that the town of Pine Island is built on a 6-sided base of the 6-sided pyramid in the city of pyramids. The whole town is there, and all the roads radiate out from the center of it. It was just mind-blowing. But who's going to believe that?
Was there water under all these pyramids? Was there water under each of them?
Well, what's interesting is that when this area was first encountered by the Europeans, and in mid-1800s, that whole area was flooded.
Wow.
Flooded. It was in a shallow lake, glacial lake. And that's why these bases of the pyramids that stuck up above that lake were called islands. So you have Black Walnut Island and Pine Island and other ones. I mean, it's amazing. And of course, they drained that lake because they wanted to turn it into fertile farming land, and it becoming the black muds at the bottom of the lake turned into perfect soil for growing onions. So that is an onion capital of the East Coast, where they grow onions.
Wow.
So, just such a history to that area, and it's so fascinating. But there's something else there that is on Earth that was not on Mars. They did not copy it on Mars. And my question is why? Why wouldn't they copy this? There is a granite mountains that stick up right next to the City of Pyramids and between that and the base of the D&M pyramid. And they have a very unusual shape. One is in the shape of a pyramid that is the exact same shape and size as the Giza pyramid. And it's carved out of solid rock, and it actually has remnants of steps going up the side. And next to it, there's another strange shaped mountain called, and it is in the shape of a key, like a key to a door, and with 3 prongs at one end. And that strange mountain is called Mount Eve, and the Pyramid Mountain is called Mount Adam. And right next to it, there's a town called Edenville. And there's another town called Eden in the same area. I mean, and you have Mount Adam and Mount Eve. Is this telling us anything, perchance? I mean, clearly our
but what I get is a real question is, since Stuart Swerdlow and others have said the CIA documents say it was the other way around, that Mars was settled before Earth. I'm just wondering why it is that you're saying the causality was in the opposite, or I'm not understanding. Which was first, the Martian or the Earth?
Well, the Mars came first. Mars came first, but it was a lot older than the stuff on Earth from the last interglacial. Okay. But when they saw that their monuments on Earth were going to be destroyed, they obviously had a significant importance to whoever built them. They wanted to create a template so that when we recovered and became spacefaring society again and went to Mars, we would find that template, and that template could then be used to find the original structures on Earth. And I seem to have been led to be the one to figure this out. Nobody else wants to believe it, right? So it's a template. And then I was able to determine the actual age of the Cydonia complex in Mars. You have a lot of speculation. Hoagland said it was 500,000 years old. Others, then he's revised it down to maybe 100,000 years old. And none of that is a couple 100,000 years old. Yeah, back during the Illinoisan glaciation. But I had a brilliant idea. It was a flash. I said, Mars doesn't have plate tectonics, but Earth does. And I noticed that there was a slight difference in the actual location of the center of the crater on Earth from that on Mars. They were separated by about 388,000 feet, 3,888 feet, okay? Which computes to, in centimeters, 118,500 centimeters, okay? And the crater center on Earth is to the north of that on where it should have been when it was originally made, because of plate tectonics. The North American plate has been moving slightly north by that amount, and about a centimeter per year. Well, if it's a centimeter per year that it's been moving north, then 118,500 becomes 118,500 years ago. And that is right at the beginning of the last ice age. So it was right in the perfect timing. They saw this is going to happen. They built the template on Mars, and now I have uncovered its presence here on Earth. And so it indicates that, Martians may have come to Earth a long time ago.
Yeah.
Great. Wow.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
That was a journey through a lot of information. Okay, so we want to get eventually into the reincarnation stuff. We're getting close to the top of the first hour. Maybe we should save that for the second hour.
Let me just stay with this. Pharoah says that Iapetus in one of the moons of Jupiter is exactly the same sort of situation as Luna, with all the attributes of hollowness and being placed in a way that it doesn't. It's always facing the Jupiter itself and the whole. And I just wonder if you have any comment on that, Iapetus.
Yes, I think I've seen that on Richard Hoagland's and Robert Morningstar's images that they have been following that. I wouldn't be surprised at anything right now. There's just so much out there that we don't understand, and to assume that we do, I think is foolish. And there are a lot of moons out there, especially around Saturn, that may be artificial as well.
Yes.
So, and the interesting thing is that they Pardon?
Did Hoagland say our moon is artificial?
He believed that there were lunar bases on the surface that go underground. Yes. How far underground? He says, the seismic data shows ringing that goes down to at least 5 kilometers, and others say deeper. And that is quite possible that the entire near side of the Earth, other than the moon, has been carved out and replaced by a sponge-like network similar to that of a styrofoam block, in which the living spaces underneath have been carved out. Because at the surface, and this is something that Hoagland showed to me in pictures of fresh impacts of meteors with the lunar surface that opened up the ground under the lunar subsurface, and everything there at the surface is comprised of these geodesic spheres. And one of my tasks was to try to see how much of the structures on the moon were made of these geodesic spheres, which were about 300 to 350 feet in diameter. And they are all stacked together and to form the different features. So everything is artificial. And there's some of the surface has been ripped up, and you can see huge chambers underneath the lunar surface that are the size of Manhattan Island. And what the hell are rectangular chambers, hundreds of thousands of feet deep, doing underneath the lunar surface? I think they were originally described by those who were brainwashed into thinking that the moon was natural, that they thought they were lava tubes. But they're not lava tubes. Lava tubes don't have right angles on them. And
right.
And some of the impacts on I have a YouTube video out there on was there a flood on the moon? Flood? What do you mean flood? There's no water on the moon, you would be told. I said, well, as a geologist, I saw all sorts of features coming off of one huge impact structure that looked like water flowing out from that impact and creating meandering channels in the lunar surface. Meandering channels, just like you have in rivers here on Earth. And then you follow them out further, and you get into depositional plains of flat sediments behind mountain ranges. And it looks as though you had this flood that ripped up the artificial lunar surface that only goes down maybe 1,000 or so feet, and then opens up into these chambers. And the implication is that the entire area of the near surface of the moon is all artificial. All artificial. Now, there are others that will agree with you right off the bat, say, oh, yeah. But where did they put all of that original rock that was there that made up the crust of the moon on the near side? Well, they piled it up on the far side. And you can find evidence all over the place on the far side of mining operations. And I've seen those pictures. And I've seen the areas of the dumps where they dumped all the material. And the astronomers are telling us now that the far side of the moon, its crust is much thicker than the near side. And that would bring the semi-metallic core of the moon closer to the near side. And that's why the moon turns. One one complete revolutionary orbit of the Earth. It's because the gravitational pull is eccentric, and so the near side is locked gravitationally. It's not tidal lock. It's actually core lock with the Earth.
Lock. Yeah.
Magnetic lock, right? So
got it.
There are all sorts of new ways of looking at things, and not that I'm correct in my opinion, but I would love to have people begin to consider that maybe I might have an idea or two.
Well, the thing is that you've generated some testable hypotheses that we can see whether it's accurate or inaccurate and to what degree. And so that's the next step is now let's make some predictions.
Right, and of course, and not to be funny, but as you said, when I heard you say testable hypotheses, what I heard was testicle hypotheses, and I said, that's what my skeptics will say. He's on an ego trip.
Oh, well, you do got to have balls to bring this stuff out. You're right.
What does happen? Oh, we're going to be going on a break. I was going to talk about the ship that crashed on the far side of the moon, but
from Escamilla's.
The music's probably going to come on any second now, but.
You're talking about that huge metallic object that's formed a crater on the south pole of the moon?
Well, there's a ship. There's a ship. Anyway, we'll pick up after the break. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
With different interpretations.
Different interpretation. Okay, back in 5.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Wadiya will remain a dictatorship. Oh, be quiet. Why are you guys so anti-dictators? Imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes and bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person and his family. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could fill your prisons with one particular racial group, and no one would complain. You could use the media to scare the people into supporting policies that are against their interests.
Tune in Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, for Liberation Nation with Deacon John, where America comes to hear the truth.
I know this is hard for you Americans to imagine, but please try.
Ohio Exopolitics will be on from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A. Mark Schneider will have guests on that will discuss many important topics, including the state of the world today. However, much of the show will be dedicated to the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. Let me read a short passage from one of his writings. Love is the highest principle of creation, and through it, everything exists in absolute logic. All of nature in its indescribable splendor is nothing but the love of creation, which is expressed visibly. The love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. Please join Mark on Ohio Exopolitics from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A.
It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why The Story Behind the Story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos. I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter. This is Revolution Radio Studio B, and our guest is Dr. Bruce Cornet. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation, because we really need your donations to keep us on the air. And we do thank you very much for everything you contribute. And before I bring back the second hour, we're going to focus on Dr. Bruce's quest for his past lives and how he uses his scientific approach, very detailed mythologies to uncover and kind of prove what was going on. So, Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say?
Well, I just to recap, we've seen how NASA has mooned us.
and they've even bent over trying to do it, right?
and our view of of the red planet has been marred.
Yes.
God.
Oh God! Yeah.
We got to stop now. But okay. So on my aquarianradio.com, I put up a little article. Scroll down past the picture, and you'll see. How did I discover my past life as Dr. Woodrow Wilson? Please explain to us your quest and discovery and the whole process. That'll take up the remaining hour. We'll have questions here and there, but take it away.
I have some questions for Woodrow, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it away.
Yeah. Well, this was highly unexpected for a scientist. Okay. I mean, not only was I treading on thin ice before with my interest in controversial discoveries, paleontological studies of spores, pollen, fossil plants, animals. But this was something that would totally hit me blindside. My late wife, Bonnie Cornet, died on the 12th of January 1991. And then about 8 months after she died, her spirit, she had told me before we died that to be prepared for her helping me find a replacement for her. And about 8 months later, I was encountered with several male voices, telepathic voices, as I came back from the mailbox at my condominium in Middletown, New York. And I stopped when one of the male voices said, "Are you ready to meet the next woman in your life?" I look around. There's nobody near me, nobody talking to me. And it was a very clear message. And I knew I was not thinking about that subject at all. Why would I? It was only 8 months since Bonnie died. I was still mourning. And so the voice said, "Are you ready to meet?" And I thought, well, maybe so. Okay. Then the voice said, "Will you accept the woman we have in mind for you?" Whoa, that stopped me in my shoes. Okay. And then I thought, the last woman that I was arranged to meet was Bonnie. And that turned out pretty amazing. So I thought yes, but this time I didn't want another blind date. So I thought, I would like to see her. And suddenly a portal opened up right in front of me in broad daylight, right next to me. It was about, 3 feet in diameter and had a glowing brown ribbon around it. And I was staring into another dimension right in front of me. All white modern kitchen. All the appliances, everything, the floor, ceiling, table, chairs, appliances were all white. And at a round kitchen table was seated a woman dressed in black. She stood out. But she was a little bit too far away for me to get a good look at her. And as soon as I thought she's a little too far away, I felt my spirit being pulled out of my body, and I passed through that portal, and I floated over her head, looking at her. I was a ghost in her world. And as soon as I thought I'd seen enough, I felt my spirit being yanked back into my body, and I saw the portal close by decreasing in its diameter until it disappeared. And I just stood there, just totally dumbfounded. Wow, what is this for real? Well, on following Monday, this was on a Friday night, and then on following Monday, I go to work. I'm walking down the hall at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory to my office, and Connie Sanchetta, a friend, a coworker, comes out of her office and she sees me. She says, "Oh, Bruce, I'm so glad I caught you. Can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Sure." She said, "Are you dating anybody?" And of course, the thought went through my head, "Oh no." And I said, "No." She said, "I had a wonderful conversation with an old college friend, and I realized that you two have a lot in common. Will you let me play matchmaker?" Oh my God. Make a long story short, when I talked to her on the phone, and when I met her in person, she was the woman that was seated at that kitchen table in a parallel dimension. Then I asked her, I told her about it, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting, because on that same day I was asked, 'Are you ready to meet the next man in your life?' And I said yes. And, 'Will you accept the man we have in mind for you?' She said yes, but she didn't ask to see what I looked like. And so there we were, being brought together. Well, we were brought together, and we got married the next year. And then in early 1993, something amazing happened. Pat was both a Reiki practitioner. She was very much interested involved in spiritual subjects, and also she was an alien abductee. So I had all of these things going for us. She heard from a friend, and I would like to read this. I sent this report to you, Janet, and maybe it would be best if I just read it straight out. Would that be okay?
Go ahead. Yes. Sounds
okay.
great.
Because, all right. How did I discover my past life as Dr. Woodrow Wilson? Doctor, yes. Most people don't realize that he was the only president ever to receive his doctorate. Okay. In the spring of 1993, Carola Van Deusen told Pat, my wife, that she was holding a group hypnotic past-life-regression session at her house on the shoreline near Keyport, New Jersey. I was curious and a little apprehensive about being hypnotized, since I had never been hypnotized before, even though my late wife, Bonnie, was a skilled hypnotist. We drove to Carola's house, and we joined a small group in one of Carola's large side rooms in a large Victorian-style house. Carola had laid out large pillows on the floor so that we could lay down on her soft rug with a pillow under our heads. She led us through a period of relaxation with more and more suggestions to go back in time in our lives. Then she told us to go even further back before our current lifetime. I recall being surprised that I recalled places I had never seen as an adult and found myself in a familiar house with turn of the 19th century furniture and wall decorations. I had no clue to who I had been, but my surroundings were very familiar. The thought of being in the White House came to mind. Then Carola told us, if we are having trouble figuring out who we were, to look for a mirror. I seem to have known where to find a mirror in a nearby restroom. I then found myself looking at my image in the mirror. I did not recognize who I saw. I studied the face carefully. When the regression session was over, Pat asked me how it went. I told her that I may have been in the White House, and I saw my image in a mirror. She said, we need to purchase a book on presidents, which we did. Looking through that book, I came upon a picture of Woodrow Wilson. I immediately recognized it as the face I had seen in the mirror in the White House. That began a several-year study of Wilson, whose life and mine contained many similarities in places we had lived and worked, and feelings of predestination. I got the thought that if we had been living as two individuals at the same time, our paths would have crossed many times. And I give a indication of 7 places that we have in common in our lives. Then in 2000, I got an email from an astrologer named Angel Star. She said that her spirit guide told her to contact me and give me information and that confirmation that I was seeking. She began her letter by telling me how Chuck Marzi, Bonnie's youngest son, died on 18 November 1991 in Pasadena, Texas. She told me how he died and the injuries he had sustained in a head-on car crash as he drove to school in the fog. Only family members and medical personnel who knew how he died, so her information was privileged knowledge that told me Angel Star's source was higher than public knowledge. Then Angel Star said, you were Woodrow Wilson. After that, she said, and you were also John the fisherman. I realized there were 2 Johns who were fishermen in the New Testament, John the Baptist and John the Beloved. I had since had a past life regression that indicates I was one of them. It wasn't until 2014 that I discovered that Angel Star was Joan Cecil Quigley, the personal astrologer of Nancy Reagan. She died at age 87 on 23 October 2014, and her nom de plume was Angel Star. Giving her message.
Quigley was my teacher.
Yeah, 4 years.
Was my teacher.
Her old man was your teacher?
David Quigley, yeah.
Yeah, holy cow,
I studied hypnosis with him, yeah.
Giving her message 4 years earlier credibility. But I wasn't completely convinced I had been Woodrow Wilson, and I even less convinced that I was John the Fisherman. Okay, so that is information that was given to me. Then in 2004, Lisa Stem, a psychic similar to John Edward, came to me on the internet when the spirit of my late wife Bonnie and her late son Chucky contacted her and wanted to reach me. I already knew that I was somehow connected to Woodrow Wilson in a past life, but I did not have anything more to go on than an impression and past life regression where I found myself in the White House, anguishing over sending Americans into a war, and saw my reflection in a mirror. Lisa gave me more details that seemed to confirm this connection. Okay, and I gave in that a report, a conversation transcription that I had with Lisa Stem. And we can go over that if you want me to. But basically, in that, she confirmed that, that what she was picking up psychically, that all of the various facts in Woodrow Wilson's life that she saw as part of my past. And that she pretty much nailed it. And although I would love to have some regressions to see what else I can pull up, to see what it is. One of the things that I was able to do, and I sent this to you, Janet, was combining my astrology chart with that of Woodrow Wilson.
I put this up on CorrienRadio.com on a page for you, so we can go to that. Yeah. And so you created a chart comparing the two of them. Is that what you did?
Right. His astrology chart with my astrology chart, and they are almost exact opposites. All of our planets and stars, except for Saturn, are on the opposite sides of our zodiac at the time. And whereas he was born at just before midnight on the 28th of December, 1856. 28 was his special number throughout his life. And he had noted that he was first married at age 28. He became elected for a governor on the 28th ballot, and he was the 28th president of the United States. And my birthday, August 31st, is 831, has been my number all the way through my life. Everything unusual that has happened in my life has had those numbers associated with it. And so the thing that
wait, can I ask you a question, a factual question? Is the rumor in the liberal world is that Wilson was incapacitated for the last part of his term, and that his wife and cabinet officers were actually running the government in his name. Is that so or not so?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's. I have no doubt about that. What is interesting is that one thing I did pick up during my past life regression is that Wilson was very disturbed that he had to send so many Americans overseas to lose their lives in World War I. That really bothered him. Now, even though Wilson was had earned his doctorate, he never participated in the military. So here he was, somebody who was without any veteran status. Okay, yet he sent tens of thousands of Americans to die in Europe, and that really bothered him. So much so that I then found out, and my report goes into details on this. And Lisa Stem was trying to help me figure out who I was. But I, at age 17, in my next life, which started almost immediately, he died in February of 1924. And soon thereafter, within a matter of a year, he was born again as a young male. Can't be sure where he was born, perhaps in Florida. But he, as he grew up, he joined the Navy. and was assigned to Pearl Harbor. And he ended up dying at Pearl Harbor at age 17.
Wow, karma. Wow.
Karma, yes. He ended up serving his country and dying for his country. And that really, completed that karma. That's something he felt so bad about that how could I, never having been in the military when he was president or before he was president, end up, sending so many people to their death. So then he died at Pearl Harbor. Now, what is even more extraordinary is that when I told Pat this, she said, well, I, in a past life regression, found out that I was a Japanese girl at Nagasaki when the atomic bomb was dropped there, and I died in that war. Wow. So, I died at the beginning of World War II, and she died at the end of World War II. And we ended up together.
Your life has been orchestrated. It's so obvious.
Yes. You can't get around that. And when I'm going to tell my story about Bonnie and how I participated in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy in the book of Revelation, you'll understand that my life has not been my free will. It is. I came here with a destiny, just as Woodrow Wilson realized he had a destiny to become president. And I have a destiny to tell my story and to help fulfill biblical prophecy, which is I've already done that job. I've already completed that part of the mission. Now it's a matter of telling my story to the world and preparing the world for what is coming very soon.
What's coming very soon?
Well, what do people think that is coming? Who do they think is going to be coming very soon?
I think the Spirit of Jesus is becoming salient in all of our hearts, and we're ready to reach out in love toward each other. That's what I think is happening, and the people that haven't been able to feel that universal love are going to be awakened by those of us who have. That's what I think.
Well, what I've found out is that Jesus did have children. And he didn't have them by his own volition, just as my children I did not have by my own volition. And that he collected them up after he returned from the cross and took them out of harm's way. And he took them into Europe along the Roman roads and matched them up with wealthy merchants along the Roman roads to be, marry their children, and said that they would receive endowments from all of his tithe that he had gotten, to help them, raise his children, but they had to only marry other people who were directly related to his children. And they became the royal blue bloods of Europe. And so they became the king. He became the king of kings, literally. And everybody thinks that's going to come in the future. No, that's already happened. It's already done.
Yes.
And
go
ahead.
So did, in your perspective, did Jesus marry Mary Magdalene and have children with her?
Yes, I think he did. But that was in addition to all of the other children that were done with surrogate mothers, just like my children were done without my knowledge before Bonnie and I even met. This has all been orchestrated by extraterrestrials, and people don't want to believe that because that takes away the divine mystery and the specialness of it.
So are your children wonderful, exceptional? What kind of kids are these kids?
Well, I have 3 children I've been introduced to. 2 when I was first introduced in spacesuits when they were floating in space over my bed and with an alien next to them. And when the vision was over and I woke my wife and she said that she was dreaming about me meeting my children. And I said, well, they didn't tell me their names. She said, well, their names are Honora and Kyle. And then I had this incredible thought of that my daughter had gone to Princeton University, but I didn't know why I had that thought. But I had to go look through the yearbooks, and I did. And I found a picture of my daughter, the woman I saw in the decompression suit, spacesuit, and I was blown away. But her name was not Honora. Her name was Tamara, and she was born 33 days before Honora. And so I made a picture of her and a lot of others, women in her yearbook, and I made up a photo lineup of 3 plates with those pictures on it. And when Pat came, the reason I did this is that right after I had this vision, this was on Saturday morning. On Monday, my wife Pat was coming home on the bus from work in New York City, and she saw this reflection in the window. She had a window seat of a beautiful woman staring at her, and she looked to see who was staring at her, and there was nobody that matched the woman's image in the mirror, in the window. And then the woman started to talk to her telepathically, and she said, "Hi, Pat. I'm Honora. I'm your husband's daughter. He is not going crazy." And when she got home, she came running in and jumped on me and hugged me and said, I met Honora. You're not going crazy." So it was quite an amazing time. So when I found Tamara's picture, which to me looked just like Honora, I made that photographic plates. And when she came home, I said, "Would you look at these pictures and see if there's anybody you recognize?" When she came to Tamara's picture, she pointed at it and said, "I will never forget that face." And I said, "Is this the woman you saw reflected in the bus window?" She said, "Yes." So that told me that Tamara and Honora are identical twins, born to 2 different mothers. Honora was born to her biological mother, and Tamara was born to her surrogate mother. Well, this was in 1967. And, Chariots of the Gods, Von Däniken, didn't come out until 1968. So this was right before the beginning of everything about, abductions and ETs and all of that stuff really became popular. Even though we have Travis Walton's experience happening back in the 70s and others happening back in the 70s. The bottom line is that my 3 children were all conceived independently of any human interaction or mating. And
are they geniuses? Are they geniuses? Are they exceptional?
I think so, but of course I'm their father. Tamara, from her yearbook, she says some amazing things about her, and I went to the university and I talked to her professors, and they thought she was amazing, an individual. And she even went on an exchange program after she graduated from undergraduate and went over to Rome and spent a Rome studying over there. And in her yearbook, at the top of her accomplishments, she says, quintessence, co-chairperson. Well, if you ever want to know what that could mean, I mean, there are a lot of different meanings that are associated with it. The most significant, I think, are that it's not just perfection or something that's perfect. It also refers to the spirit world, to the ether, and to the gravitational constant of energy. So it is. It has a significance in relationship to the creation of the universe, quintessence. Now, what is she saying? She's co-chairperson. Why does she say that? Okay. Who are the other members, co-chairpersons? Huh? I mean, this is really an amazing statement that she makes. And I'm going to be talking about that at the Laughlin UFO Mega Conference in February of 2020. Wow. And I may get into a lot of trouble from saying this, because I will be essentially saying that I participated in the fulfillment of chapter 12 in the book of Revelation, about the woman who bore the male child. And the theologians want to think that the woman is a symbol for Israel, that she never existed, she was not alive, and that the male child is just an indirect reference to Jesus born, thousands of years earlier. And that's not far from the truth. If you read chapter 12, it reads like the life of an actual person, that things were happening to that person. And everything in those 17 verses are matched by Bonnie's life. And I was asked on the 23rd of March, 1981, I was on a Baptist bus heading back to Houston, and an invisible entity asked me, are you ready to serve God and do whatever he asks you to do? And I thought for a moment and said, well, I'd be a hypocrite if I said no. And I said yes. Then the voice said, there is somebody who needs help. If I bring her to you, will you help her? And I said, yes, when will I meet her? And the voice said, before the year is out. And I met Bonnie on the 15th of December, 1983. And she turned out to be the woman who was brought to me from New Jersey. And if you read the scripture, it is amazing. It says that right before she meets me, that she will be flown, given 2 wings of a great eagle, and flown to her place in the wilderness. Well, the time that John wrote about that woman, Texas was complete wilderness. And I had just bought a brand new house, and I invited her her youngest son to join me and live and I would take care of them. And she moved into that house on the 12th of January, 1984, and exactly as the Bible says, that she would be protected by me, the earth, for times and half a time. 7 years later, on the 12th of January, 1991, she died. And she was born at 1:38 a.m., and Bonnie died at 1:38 a.m. How do I know? Because she died in my arms, took her last breath, and I looked at the clock. So I know that, the timing of this. And there's our 2 periods of protection in Revelation chapter 12. That was the second that I just described. The first was for 1,260 days after the male child was born. And she would be taken into a place where she would be protected from the dragon who was after her. And at the end of that 1,260 days, on the 12th of January, another 12th January, 1971, her husband had just been released from the army, and they had just moved into their brand new apartment in New Jersey, and she fixed him breakfast in bed. She was so thrilled. He was extremely jealous of her because he had wanted to marry a virgin, and on their wedding night he discovered she was not, because the male child was born on 1st of August 1967, a year before they got married. And when she woke up on the 1st of August, her belly was flat, there was blood between her legs, and her hymen was broken. But there was no fetus or afterbirth in the bed sheets. The male child had been taken, as the Bible says, up to the throne of God. Well, been taken up to space, at least, and put in an incubator. And so he was extremely jealous, and he was very mean to her. He would punch her and be angry with her whenever he saw her meeting with another man that could be a competitor with him. And so when she fixed him breakfast after he had gotten out of the army, he became infuriated. He said, "This is proof that you have been cheating on me, and you have a guilty conscience." And he reared back on the bed and punched her in the small of the back and sent her flying into the wall, where she collapsed to the floor in extreme pain. He had ruptured one of her kidneys. She was taken to the hospital, and she said she told me that first day we were together of how she watched the doctor, the intern, and the nurses try to save her that morning at the hospital, and then pull the sheet over her head and put her on a gurney and wheel her into the morgue. She watched her with this happen in spirit. And then about, at the end of his shift, probably 12 hours later, she was there with her body in the morgue. She saw the intern come in, and he came to pray for her. And he pulled back the sheet from her body, and he started to pray. And she could hear his thoughts, she told me. And then he began to cry, because this was the first patient he had ever lost as a doctor. And it was just horrible for him to have experienced this. And she said to me, looking across my kitchen table, she said, I could not bear to see him cry for me. So I re-entered my body and I healed it, and I woke up to find a mortuary tag on my toe. Wow. So her period... Now, we know this had to have happened if she did actually die when her protection ended, that first period of protection. If you count the number of days, 1,260, the Bible says, from the day that the male child was born to the time her protection was over, which is the day she died, it's exactly 1,260 days. So how is that possible? And and then later on, after a description of the war in heaven, which we all know has been going on, that it says how the dragon was cast down to earth, and the dragon went after the woman and persecuted her. Well, in the late 1970s to 1980, she developed 3 types of deadly cancer in 8 months. How many people do you know can develop that many types of cancer? She developed breast cancer. She had double mastectomies. Uterine cancer. She had full hysterectomy. And she developed Clark's spreading version of malignant melanoma. And her doctor found a tumor growing in her left thigh that he had to operate on immediately. They did a biopsy of it, and they found out it was at stage 4. If it went to further than that, she would not be able to survive through the metastasis. And they operated on her and pulled it out, but in the process, it removed a lot of muscles and tendons from her thigh, leaving her unable to walk very well on her left leg. She could kick it out in front of her and use it like a crutch, but if she got tired, she had to use a crutch or cane to walk. She was permanently disabled because of that. So the scripture says, and the dragon persecuted her, and I would call that persecution. Would you not? And then it said,
"Hey, Bruce."
Yes.
Bruce, we don't have I don't know. I wanted to touch it a little bit. We started with the second half of our being about reincarnation. I think that's kind of incomplete.
Okay.
You sent me all these pictures, and I had a couple of questions. So, what are these pictures about? You were doing your DNA. What were you doing that you were tracing back your DNA? This had something to do with Woodrow Wilson and...
No, it doesn't have anything to do with Woodrow Wilson, because your past
Woodrow Wilson.
Right, past lives can be independent of your biological genealogy. They can be similar or the same, but most of us, our past lives are in somebody else's DNA. Okay, the reason for
you are genetically related to Wilson, as
no,
sometimes
I'm not.
Family members go from one incarnation to another within a family.
It's possible. I would like to check that out to see if there was a connection. But really, why I provided that Ancestry.com data was to show that I am connected to Bonnie, okay, as a soul group, and that my genealogy goes all the way back to European blue bloods, to 3 different lineages from early England, from Saxon, Normandy, Saxon England, in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. And my DNA has traced me back there too, to that period of time as well, confirming that I have the blue blood DNA. And as I said earlier in this program, that Jesus had all of those children that he put into families that became the European royalty, and they hold his DNA. Okay, now that means
the presidents all go back to Charlemagne. So if you were tracing this form back and tying in with Wilson, there's probably a connection. Yeah. Anyway,
but the point
all go back to Charlemagne. Most of the presidents do. Yes, right. Go ahead.
The point being is that in any family, as you have generation after generation, each generation has fewer of the chromosomes of the original 2 people who started that lineage. Okay, so if you start out with two people with 46 chromosomes, all of their children only have half of each of their chromosomes. Okay, so they get 23 chromosomes from their father and 23 from the mother. That is split in half again with their children. It's down to 12 strands, and the next is down to 6, and the next is down to 3, and the next is down to 1 to 2. Okay, and finally, if you go on about 5 generations, all of the children, the great-great-great-grandchildren of those original parents, only have 1 chromosome of their original ancestors. Okay? So the importance of this is that if you had 46 chromosomes of Jesus dispersed within his children, that the blue bloods intermarried to keep contamination from outside, and so that those 46 chromosomes would be essentially contained within that population of blue bloods. But somebody would have to start causing arranged marriages. And we know the blue bloods had arranged marriages, but there would also have to be an ET involvement in order to make sure that when that chromosomes would be brought together in their offspring, certain ones that were present in Jesus. So as this goes on, eventually it got to a point where arranged marriages would be bringing together those 46 chromosomes into one body. Why? Because the male child has to have not only the DNA of Jesus, but he also has to be able to prove that he has a lineage, a genealogical lineage that goes all the way back to King David. You might say, well, how can they be sure that it was King David? Well, they do have a lot of DNA now coming out of that time period, and they do have the blood of Jesus on the Shroud of Turin. They've already typed it, and it is AB.
Plus, the royals have their lineage going back on to. So the royals have they're doing this. The royals are doing this genealogy. And so Penny Bradley traced hers back to the royals. She said that her ancestors circled around. So cousins and second and third cousins kept marrying each other. So when you went back in time, did you see any of your family members, cousins and second and third cousins marrying each other?
Well, I don't have to see that personally. I just know that is exactly what had to happen, because when Jesus turned his children over to those wealthy merchants along the Roman roads, that he told them that in order to get this endowment, to be blessed, you and become the leaders of your areas, you have to maintain secrecy about what blood you have in you, and in order to recreate the male child as having all the 46 chromosomes of Jesus. All of those people have to be arranged marriages and brought back to that one particular point. And so Bonnie and I were the last two to come together and to be able to do this. And the implication is, and I've been told this, is that Kyle, our son, is the male child. Okay?
Yeah, I thought it was going.
Right.
And
then you have this little, we're almost out of time, but you have this little, no, we have 10 minutes. You have this little chart, which has the Isle of Man, and then I guess it goes over to Liverpool, Manchester. I was on, this is Ancestry.com, so it goes down, it identified your ancestors down to where they were in England. Is that what this is about?
Yes.
So how do you get that? Do you have to pay the additional fees to get this level of detail in Ancestry?
Oh, interesting. I mean, I did one set, okay? This was several years ago. And then they notified me and said, we've reevaluated your DNA and we were coming up with a new set. It's pretty much the same as before, but it's a little bit more refined. And so they just did it for me. And I thought this was rather amazing. And my ancestry has been traced genealogically back to de Burgh, Sir de Flegg, and Cornet. And as I said, the 11th, 12th, 13th, and even the 14th centuries of Saxon England when they spoke French as a native language. And even Sir Hubert de Burgh in the 14th century was the Chief Justice of England and Ireland at that time. So, and Sir Henry Flegg and previous Fleggs, they owned castles and they sold them to participate and pay for their participation in the Crusades. So all of that goes back and been traced back there to William the Conqueror and to Sweden, to Scotland, to Ireland, to England, and to France and Germany. So that's where my ancestry comes from.
Right. And so how many generations have you gone back?
Well, how long is a generation? Let's see. It's about what?
I don't know. Let's say you went back to what, the 1600s or something?
1011.
So you went back further than most people can get. But that's because they connected in with the royals. So
right.
They were able to.
Exactly.
I'm going to have to go. So what's the advanced level of ancestry, not the first level? I have to go pay, I guess, to get this advanced level. And they pardon?
Now you've interested me in that. Yes, I'm going to want to do that. I'm very curious to find out if they can look for those rare, genes that can connect me with even older. Because one of my first ancestry results was that I have been traced back to Italy and Greece. So that coming up through Italy and Greece into France. So I know that much.
Do you know what your blood type is?
Mine is A, and Bonnie's was AB. And the Shroud of Turin's blood is AB. And not only that, but they found the genetic marker for the Druze, which is a Muslim Hindu sect living in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent. And that is pretty amazing, shocking, that he would be a Druze, because that takes his lineage a little bit outside of the normal, Hebrew line. Even though everybody back there is in that area is related somehow.
Yeah, the Druze fought on the side of Israel against the Palestinians and their allies in the various wars. They're Israeli citizens.
Right, exactly. They are very, very patriotic to Israel. Exactly.
So, for you personally, what does it mean to be Woodrow Wilson? How does that
Well,
translate into this
it doesn't really.
information?
It indicates that I had some spectacular past lives. Okay, and that life in particular. My mother always told me when I was growing up, "You'll never become a politician." I wondered why she kept on saying that. It's because I had already been that, and I didn't want to become a politician again. I became a scientist. And Wilson had traveled up and down the East Coast and had seen all of the rocks. In fact, at Princeton University, it's built on the Triassic rocks with lots of fossils and that are exhibited there in their museum. And he was also a teacher at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, that's built on top of Jurassic rocks. And he saw lots of fossil dinosaur prints and fossil fish there in their museum. And he was very interested in those rocks, but he didn't have the time for it. He was not a earth scientist. So that's why I think I became an earth scientist, because of my fascination for those rocks. And I wanted to know, what age they were and what they contained. And that's what I did as my profession in this lifetime. So, I've done that job as a politician. Now I'm doing a job as a scientist.
All right. Do you have any questions?
Well, just this is off the wall, but what about this idea that some of the large, apparently natural structures are really ossified or sandalized beings? You've probably heard and seen some current research.
Mud fossils research.
Where are these structures?
South Africa, the ones that I'm aware of. Michael Tellinger has been pointing them out. And then Janet has been watching these films that show when you take cross sections of granite, you start seeing there's cellular patterns and venous and arterial patterns of some kind of creature with circulation and cells built into the rock. I don't know if any of this is so. This is just what my wife tells me.
Well, I was watching, it's called, it's a YouTube channel called Mud Fossils. And it's pretty far out there, but,
Yeah, I would say.
What it was saying, these large statues, they're finding some of the large statues are really bodies that were coated with a fine layer that solidified and became solid. And so they've cracked these giant statues, 30 feet tall. And so they had one that was cracked, and it showed the ligaments in the leg. And the guy, he knows bodies. He goes, look, that's a ligament, that's a this, that's a muscle, that's this. And this was a statue, one of the big giant ones that were, 30, 40, 50 feet tall. And we're looking at it in the museums and over there in Egypt and places. We're thinking it's just a statue somebody carved.
Or it was a guy.
But it's a real guy in there, at least the one that he was showing.
Well, maybe, Janet, maybe just to throw in a curveball in this, they looked into the eyes of Medusa and were turned to stone.
Well, he did bring up the Medusa thing, and then there's this other one. I recommend going to watch it, and maybe we can do a show on this down the line. I just didn't have time to follow it through, but it's fascinating. They have this large, if it's a carving, it's very detailed. Looks like a man with long hair and beard, and he's in a waterway, and he's reaching his hand into the water, and he's got something he was fighting. But he's frozen like in Medusa, and it's like I can't track that down. I'm going, wow, that's fascinating. So they have all these pictures, and so he's saying that the sides of mountains that are frozen, these are actually giants that were, enormous, like
frozen.
They were people. And
I think there were. Yeah, I think there really were. They allegedly found skeletons, but the governments want to cover all that stuff up because it's too shocking.
So there's this one mountain, and it looks like a giant hand with fingers sticking up out of the earth, and it closes up. It goes, look, there's fingernails, and look, it's a frozen giant. So they're starting to do DNA analysis. Anyway, Sasha brought it up. I haven't had a chance But someone else said, "Oh, you haven't watched Mud Fossil University? Take a look at it." And so, somebody needs to research that. We'll do a report on it. But why did you wrap that up for one reason?
Oh, because a geologist who's been chipping away at rocks has seen the inside of more rocks than you and I have seen in a long time. You know, I wanted to see what you wanted to say.
Oh, so rocks, so he's saying, like, this rock is a heart. So he shows, you think it's a rock, and he didn't know it's a heart. You know, a fossilized heart. In your research, have you seen any fossilized remains of?
Well, fossilized remains can be petrified, like a wood can be petrified.
Yes.
And replaced by minerals. And it can look a lot like a natural rock after it's completely replaced and there's no organic material left. Also, what bothers me is that they've actually found masses of granite with human footprints in the surface. How does that happen?
Yeah.
Well, this guy was saying that granite was actually like living mass, and that it's soft at some point, so when something walks on it, it leaves an impression, and it later solidifies.
Right. And if there's one interesting show that I saw, YouTube, which showed sides of mountains that had melted and flowed like a lava before they re-solidified. And Dr. Charles Koss of Melbourne, Australia, has many YouTube movies on the pyramids, and he showed in the bottom of one of them stairs that had been melted and then re-solidified. And there's nothing that we know in our technology that can explain how these sandstone and granite rocks could literally soften to the point that they would sag and bend. So there's a lot we don't know.
Do you know what Brown's gas is? It makes chemically bonded aggregate cement rather than plain aggregate cement. And that's how they pour the forms around Angkor Wat, the 1 mile on each side with into a form. And so that we do have in our technology and ancient technology ways of running sandstone, particularly.
I'm going to check if we're still on. Matt, are we still broadcasting? It's 57.
Yeah, I know. I see that. Let me go look.
Anyway, then the other thing he said, they sometimes built walls out of crushed humans. It was kind of gross, but he was showing these carvings where it shows them crushing the humans, and then they were spreading that and making walls, and then that would solidify. Ew!
They're not eating it as soylent green?
No, they're using it to build their walls. It was soft material, and then it solidified. Ew! Anyway, we'll pick that up another time.
Hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome to Revolution Radio.
It's once again time for Open Canvas. Join Ennead Painter and his guests as they search for information on subjects that have many unanswered questions. Hopefully, we can shorten the endless journey to fill reality's empty canvas. Please remember that here at Revolution.Radio, we are totally listener supported.
Howdy, folks. I hope you all are having a pleasant Monday evening. it's Veterans Day, and I'd like to tell all the veterans out there that we sure appreciate them. I myself is a veteran, and I understand their plight, and I believe that it's a subject that needs to be looked into more often than it actually gets looked into. And I want to thank all the veterans here at the station. We've had a heck of a turn.